Okay, another comment from one of my YouTubers. This is the NT wife, and she states, I just want to know my husband is trying. If he fails, that's okay. That's a great comment. And to the other NT wives that may be watching this video, sometimes it would be very appropriate and even healthy for the marriage if you would reward effort. Reward effort, regardless of the end result. And to the ASD spouses out there, you have to put forth some effort, right? If you fail, fine. That's not a mistake. That's just a learning process. So, great comment. Thank you. NTs, reward effort every once in a while. Question. Why would a healthy woman want to be disrespected and emotionally minimized to be with someone with issues? She wouldn't. And so maybe stop viewing autistic traits as disrespect and emotional minimization. Another question. Are the traits of ASD calling your wife vile names, like a schoolyard bully? I would say that what's going on there is the result of high anxiety. So when he's calling you names and being bullyish, just know that his brain is flooded with cortisol and adrenaline. He's in fight or flight mode. He's feeling intimidated and fearful. And his calling you names and being bullyish is a defense mechanism against anxiety. It's a way, a very dysfunctional way, to discharge pent-up energy, which is anxiety. So in those moments where he's being basically emotionally abusive, you need to let him know that I'm not going to tolerate being on the receiving end of emotional abuse. I'll be over there at the other end of the house, and when you calm down, we can have a discussion or talk about what's going on. And you need to let him know ahead of time that whenever you start calling me names, I'm going to leave. Question. Is it possible that a person with ASD and a person with severe obsessive compulsive personality disorder in a relationship could trigger each other? That would be likely, because both parties are going to have some perfectionism. Both parties are going to have some obsessive compulsive tendencies. Both parties are going to need high levels of structure, which is going to appear as severe rigidity, and that's the short list. So absolutely can be a trigger for both parties. Question. Do all individuals with autism have alexithymia? It has been my experience that all people with autism have some degree of alexithymia, some worse than others, but not everybody with alexithymia has autism. There's a lot of people that are alexithymic that have other disorders other than ASD level 1. But even if the individual is alexithymic, that doesn't mean they're doomed. There's this neuroplasticity. In other words, your brain can learn new things. That includes developing an emotional vocabulary, developing some emotional literacy, understanding, or at least becoming better at understanding your emotions and the emotions of others. So there is some hope that those who are alexithymic can develop some emotional reciprocity and so on. Question. Does it make a big difference if the person is diagnosed since childhood or completely undiagnosed or not diagnosed? The answer is, if the child gets diagnosed in childhood, that's a beautiful thing, because with early diagnosis, there can be early interventions. With early interventions, this child can learn some social skills and emotional literacy from a very young age, when their brain is very moldable and like a sponge soaking up knowledge. And it is such a great thing, this early intervention business, that oftentimes when the little boy or little girl gets reassessed when they're young adulthood, 25 years old or so, they don't meet enough of the criteria to even have the diagnosis anymore. I'm not saying that there's a cure or a fix, but I'm just saying that with early intervention, your traits will be so minimal at age 22 to 28, somewhere in there, that you won't even meet enough of the diagnostic criteria to get the label. Question. How can I distinguish ASD1 from covert narcissism? Well, the person on the autism spectrum appears to be selfish and egotistical due to mind blindness, emotions blindness, executive function deficits, anxiety, sensory sensitivities, weak central coherence, problems with prediction, and so on. The narcissist appears to be egotistical and selfish because he is. He is trying to manipulate others, control others, use others for his own gain. So the behavior looks the same, but the motivation behind there is completely different. Okay, a question from one of my YouTubers. How can you get your ASD partner to be more emotional or sentimental? That's like an ASD spouse asking me, how can I get my neurotypical wife to be less emotional and more logical? It's a brain wiring thing. If he has ASD level 1, he's going to have this little thing called alexithymia, which is emotions blindness. And so that means he's not going to be so emotional. He's going to be more logical. He's not going to be high in social and emotional intelligence, but he'll be high in logical intelligence. So the answer to the question is, how can you get your ASD partner to be more emotional or sentimental? That's like asking me, how can I get my ASD spouse to not have autism? Okay, question. How do we know what expectations are reasonable, like chores and responsibilities? I'm assuming this is from an NT wife. Well, it would be best to come up with 3 different lists, and preferably you and your ASD husband would come up with this list in the company of an ASD expert who has some knowledge of how to deal with autism in the context of a neurodiverse marriage. But you could try to do it without a therapist or a counselor or a coach. The list would be, in this case, your ASD husband, things that he can do and is willing to do and he does well. Things that he can do but is simply not willing to do. And the things that he simply can't do. Like, for example, maybe some child care stuff that either he can't do it or he would do it very poorly. So there are some things that he does that he doesn't mind doing and he does them well. So you can expect that those are his responsibilities. With respect to the stuff that he could do but he doesn't want to, I would ask him, and I do this with the ASD guys in group, to do a cost-benefits analysis. In other words, do the advantages outweigh the disadvantages of doing that thing that you don't want to do but she wants you to do? If the answer is yes, then probably go ahead and do it. If it's something that he doesn't want to do but you want him to do it, and he does a little cost-benefits analysis and goes, if I go ahead and do that, the disadvantages are going to outweigh the advantages, then I would say, well, then don't do it. So that's up to him, personal choice. So, but again, I would come up with those 3 lists with somebody who has some expertise in ASD so that he can kind of coach you through and get a list of things that will be written down, could be stuck on the refrigerator. Hey, dear husband, these are the things that I expect you to do. And then this way you get his buy-in, and with the buy-in, hopefully you get some consistency. Okay, question from Jenny. How do you suggest someone may have Asperger's? I would first of all start with the strengths. In other words, you could say, well, there's this condition where people are very high in general IQ, very high in logical intelligence. They're great in thinking in pictures. They're great with systematizing. They're great at being able to focus on details for extended periods of time. And also, sometimes they have sensory sensitivities and emotional dysregulation and problems in relationships. And there's a name for this weird combination of strengths and challenges, and it's called Asperger's. And I don't know, what do you think? So you're not really suggesting that they have Asperger's. You're relaying some of the strengths, some of the challenges, and then let them decide whether they think they have it or not. Okay, another question from one of my YouTubers. So how would an AS partner know they were in love if they have alexithymia? Well, with alexithymia, they are going to kind of be out of touch with their emotions somewhat, and they're not going to have an emotions vocabulary, but that doesn't mean they don't have any emotions. They certainly do experience emotions, but those emotions tend to be very strong before they experience them. So one of the emotions that they do experience and they do know that they're having would be anger. But even in that case, sometimes it's after they've exploded and, they've punched a hole in the drywall. Well, I guess I was angry. But that's a good question, because some people with alexithymia confuse love with a newfound yet temporary special interest. Question Is it possible to be autistic and also have Cassandra syndrome if your partner is also autistic? Absolutely. It doesn't matter whether you're autistic or not. The only thing that matters is you're in a relationship with a significant other. And in this relationship, since you are a social creature by nature, you're expecting and hoping for and need emotional reciprocity, affection, connection. And when you don't get that for years and years and years on end, you don't get one of your primary needs met. It's a safety need. It's a human need. It's not a want or desire. It's great if it happens, but if it doesn't happen, I'm okay. No. If you don't get emotional connection with some other human being, it's as bad for your mental health as not having any water would be bad for your physical health. So it's definitely possible. And so if you're not getting validation, give and take in conversation, sharing, physical touch, and so on, then, and this has gone on for 10, 20 years, then that is definitely Cassandra syndrome right there, is being on the receiving end of emotional deprivation to the point where you're losing your sanity and you're losing your sense of self, and it's affecting your mental health, it's affecting your physical health. What I run into most often with, especially ladies with Cassandra syndrome, is autoimmune disease. So you're a social creature by nature. You have to have connection with others, especially your significant other. If that doesn't happen, it makes us as human beings sick.
Another comment from one of my YouTubers. But the end result is the same. If someone acts insensitive and selfish, they are insensitive and selfish. Lipstick on a pig. I got news for you, lipstick on a pig. They're not acting. They're exhibiting traits of the disorder. Yeah, there's no acting going on.
Okay, we've got a question from John. How should I handle this when my NT wife says that she feels I'm always interrogating her by always asking questions? Well, I wouldn't ask questions. I would simply state where you're confused or whatever you're unclear about. You can use something along the lines of, I'm not really sure about blah, 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 or I'm kind of confused about such and such, or I'm really unclear about what to do with bling bling. You fill in the blank with whatever it is, okay? And then let it be up to her whether she answers the question or not. Now, that's point number one. Point number two is, if you want to ask some questions, keep it to 2 maximum. Don't ask one, then she answers, then you ask a second question based on her answer, then the third question based on that answer. That is interrogating. So 2 questions max, but preferably just state where you're confused and let her choose whether she wants to answer or not. Question. When we empathize in this neurodiverse situation, it's held against us, no, as evidence of our history of neglect. I'm assuming this is an NT spouse, probably an NT wife. You empathizing with your ASD spouse has nothing to do with his neglecting you. If you feel like he's neglecting you, it's not purposeful. He's not thinking, well, how can I just stay away from her and make her feel as lonely as possible? What's going on is he's hyper-focused on his special interest over there for extended periods of time to the exclusion of everything else, including you. So it's not that he doesn't want to connect with you or wants you to feel like you've been abandoned or rejected. He's just hyper-focused on his special interest over there of a non-social and emotional nature. So that's one of the issues that make it look as if he's being neglectful. And I know it doesn't matter whether it looks like it or not, it still feels to you as neglect and still hurts. So I'm not minimizing that at all. But the motivation behind this neglect is he's low in social and emotional intelligence, low in social and emotional skills, and low in social and emotional needs, unlike you. Question. An autistic friend suggested living in separate ends of the house, having separate living quarters. Actually, that's not a bad idea in the event that both spouses are super resentful and you continue to re-injure one another on a daily basis. In other words, continue to blame, shame, accuse, belittle, attack one another's personality. So living in separate quarters might be a good thing to do, at least temporarily. And then when the resentment level gets down, and it's only going to get down if both spouses are working with a therapist somewhere to work on their issues, then maybe do a reunification process temporarily to see how that goes. Seems to work, then maybe live in the same end of the house. So that's something to consider in the event that the resentment is really deep and the two of you are just basically punishing one another on a daily basis. Question: neurodiverse female with a neurotypical male partner. Where do we get help? Well, there's a link right here that will take you to another video, and I have a neurodiverse couples group, and in this video it will describe it, and there'll be a link underneath that video where you can register for that group. So I do have a neurodiverse couples group. Doesn't matter whether it's an NT wife, ASD husband, or vice versa. Question from a YouTuber: why do we think that autism is less bad than narcissism? I don't think either one of them are bad. Autism is a developmental disorder. Narcissism can be a personality disorder. So it's a disorder. Let's don't have a judgment about it. But I will say this: people with narcissistic tendencies will tend to manipulate and control other people for their own gain. Whereas people on the autism spectrum appear to control other people because they feel out of control in a world that they feel they don't even belong in. And also controlling circumstances is one of their anxiety reduction strategies. Question: can you discuss why when my boyfriend gets upset he always threatens to call the police? It's extremely immature. Well, if he's threatening to call the police, then that means he's extremely fearful of you. And you may have become his number one source of anxiety, and he doesn't have the social or emotional skills to resolve the problem by himself. And it is a very immature thing, but just know that he's doing that because he feels extremely threatened, and he also feels hopeless and helpless and powerless to deal with this situation on his own. And it's also obviously an idle threat in order to get you to back off. Okay, quick question from one of my YouTubers. Should ASD be rather married to ASD? Is that a recipe for their happiness? I don't know that it's going to be a recipe for their happiness, but it might be a recipe for them being more on the same page with respect to their brain wiring. You have an NT married to an ASD spouse, those two are going to have quite a dichotomy. The NT spouse is going to be very intuitive, high in social and emotional skills, high in social and emotional needs. The ASD spouse, not so much. But the ASD spouse is going to be high in logical intelligence, and he's going to be very task-oriented, but only tasks of a non-social and emotional nature. Now you get two people with ASD together, they're going to kind of be on the same page and understand one another's challenges in the areas of mind blindness, emotions blindness, executive function issues, anxiety, sensory sensitivities. So, could that result in a happier marriage? I think it's very possible. Okay, another quick question from one of my YouTubers. Should I tell him he's ASD? Only if you're a diagnostician and you've assessed him and you know he has ASD. If you go in there and tell him he has ASD when you don't know for sure, just know that's going to start a fight. But you can do a little research, come up with the strengths associated with ASD, also come up with a few of the challenges associated with ASD that he also happens to exhibit, some of those same behaviors, some of those traits. Then your message can go like this. Instead of, you have ASD, it can be, well, there's this condition where there's these strengths, and you list those. And there's also these challenges, and you list those. These are traits of ASD that he also exhibits. And you can say, you know, that's interesting that the person would have these challenges but have all of these strengths too. And you just kind of plant a seed. Okay, here's a comment. Please do something on ASD1 male when they reach old age. Well, there's three things that I have found. One, there's no difference in their exhibition of traits in old age. Two, sometimes their exhibition of traits worsen, and that's usually due to decreased mental health and decreased physical health. That has little to do with ASD in and of itself. And then the third thing that often happens is symptoms improve. And that's usually due largely to the fact that the older individual is more humble and more compassionate. They have just kind of mellowed out with age, and they're more interested in keeping the peace than sticking to their guns and being abrasive. Comment from a YouTuber. The inability to empathize with mind blindness is a type of mind blindness itself. That's absolutely correct. I've been preaching that for how many years? 10 plus. So if I can't see that somebody else has certain blind spots, like mind blindness, alexithymia, some executive function deficits, anxiety, sensory sensitivities, problems with prediction, weak central coherence, and several other things, I can't see that this person has these blind spots, then I have a blind spot. And with my blind spot, I assume that this other person with autistic traits could do better if they would just see better. Okay, another comment from one of my YouTubers. Mark, this is what we've been told by NT therapists for the last 30 years. Talk about your feelings. I feel such and such. Yeah, you can talk about your feelings. I'm not sure you're going to problem solve by talking about feelings. Your feelings are important. You need to talk to somebody about your feelings. But if you have an ASD spouse, you have a spouse who has alexithymia, which is emotions blindness, which he's going to be out of touch with his feelings and your feelings. So to talk about feelings is to use a foreign language. Oh, kitty taking a nap. Anyway, another question from one of my YouTubers. What can you do if they refuse to acknowledge they have ASD when the writing is on the wall? Can't get them to admit it. Well, first of all, writing on the wall does not constitute an assessment, and I'm guessing that you're not a diagnostician. Why would he want to acknowledge something if neither one of you know for sure? Furthermore, the guys that I work with in the men's group, some of them have ASD level 1, some of them don't. Some of them have had an assessment, some of them have not. Some of them are self-diagnosed, some are not. By self-diagnosed, I mean they have seen an online quiz and they said, yeah, you know, I have a lot of those traits, and the traits that I do have definitely caused a problem in the marriage. So that's kind of being self-diagnosed. So it doesn't matter to me whether they get an assessment or not, or whether they acknowledge that they have ASD or not, as long as they know there's a problem in the marriage. Question from one of my YouTubers. Have any suggestions on how to fill my emotional needs? The lack of intimacy is killing me inside. How many people do we have on the planet? You're going to put all your eggs in one basket? And if this one person, I'm assuming you're talking about your ASD husband, doesn't meet your emotional needs, then you're just going to go through life with an empty tank? Pretty sure that there's a lot of people that could help you get some emotional reciprocity, give and take in conversation, moral support, etc. I'm not talking about cheating here either. So maybe put your eggs in multiple baskets rather than one. Question from one of my YouTubers. How do I introduce my hubby to this concept that he is possibly on the spectrum? Okay, well, if he is on the spectrum, he's going to have way more strengths than challenges. So you want to list those strengths, and then you can list some challenges. So when you're talking to him, you can say, hey, you know, there's this condition where the individual has all of these strengths, but they also have some of these challenges. And then you're going to ask him, can you relate to that at all? I'm just wondering, I'm just curious, does that resonate? So you're putting it in the form of a question rather than insinuating that he might be on the autism spectrum. So again, list his strengths that are also some of the strengths of ASD, list a few of his challenges that are also associated with ASD, run those traits past him and let him decide if he can relate to any of that. Question. What can you do if they refuse to acknowledge they have ASD when their writing is on the wall? Well, nobody should acknowledge they have ASD unless they've had an assessment. That's number one. Number two, Most guys who are suspected of having ASD, if they do an informal quiz online, most of them, as in like 95% plus, will go, yeah, you know what, I don't know if I have ASD or not, and I might even think that I don't, but I definitely have some of those traits, and those traits are causing a problem in the marriage. So as long as he has that kind of an admission, at least he's admitting that he has some of the traits and is causing a problem. That's really the only thing he needs to acknowledge. Okay, another question from one of my YouTubers. Any advice for the neurotypical wife who has to spend hours with the ASD family? Well, first of all, you may want to set some boundaries and not attend every family gathering. That's point number one. Point number two is take periodic time aways. Maybe you have to use a bathroom, maybe you forgot something in the car, maybe you have to take a phone call, etc. You can be very discreet about it. And also, not everybody is equally autistic. ASD level 1 is high functioning autism. And on that high functioning end of the autism spectrum, there's a smaller spectrum. Some individuals are high functioning and almost pass as neurotypicals. So pick the least autistic one of the bunch, and maybe you'll get lucky and find two, and spend most of your time in conversations with those individuals. Okay, another question. So Mark, how do you deal with the assessment of the unfairness? If it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. Well, your assessment is exactly just that. It's an assessment. It's an opinion. It's your download. You're making up a story that you believe that the neurodiverse marriage, in this case, is unfair. So if it quacks like a duck, it's not the duck that's being unfair. It's your assessment, your assumption about what the duck is doing that perceives, that helps you to perceive that the situation is unfair. Hey, this is Mark Hutton. Would you like to schedule a one-on-one Zoom call? Okay, it's so simple. Just look under any of my videos in the description area. Click on this Calendly link. Now you see my calendar. Pick your month, your day, anytime that's available. Enter your name and email address. Then you'll get a follow-up email with the Zoom link on the day and time that you picked. And voila, we will talk.